Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of our Farming RPG tutorial series. So right now we're able to interact in the shop and buy things. Today we're going to work on the relational aspect, because right now we can't directly interact with the character apart from the shop. But we want to have some dialogues and stuff. So first thing that we need to do over in our Essentials prefab is to set up the UI elements for dialogue. Let's get that set up. We have our dialogue UI now, and so let's create a new folder, dialogue, and then a new class, dialogue manager. Going to make this a singleton class, and then we'll need our components. So we'll need Unity engine.ui. We'll take the whole panel, speaker text, the dialogue text. Put dialogue manager here, over in our manager object. And then we'll drag each of them. So the entire dialog panel is this, and our speaker text. Then let's create a basic function to to change whatever text is on here. So create a new function called clock. And we should take in two variables, speaker and a message. By default, dialog panel should not be active. And only when we want to talk does it get set active. Now, there are cases where there is no speaker. An example would be there are use cases where there won't be anything on here. So in those cases, we'll just not show it at all. So the parent object of speaker text panel, it will be set active. When the speaker is not blank. But if it is left blank, then it will not be even shown. And finally, we just have to set the dialog text. So now we'll need to format this to make things easier. So we'll need to create a new struct, dialog line. And in dialog line, take in these two things, the speaker and the message. And then we'll create a constructor for this. The reason why we create this struct is because we want to design the lines for each of our characters here. So let's also create a new folder. Characters. A new script, character data. It's going to be a scriptable object. So like For example, if you're meeting the character for the first time, if we have something like a list of dialogue lines, or what he will say on the first meet. Maybe something he says by default, for example. Don't forget to make our dialog line system dot serializable so that it can appear on the inspector. So now there's like a speaker and a message. I'm gonna give it more room. Just give it a text area attribute. That looks way better. Speaker is Jeff. Something like that. Likewise, another use case that we have for our dialog would be for our shop. As for our shop, we want the shopkeeper to say something before the shop opens. So let's add something. Let's give it a I can say something like, welcome to my store before the shop thing starts. Well, anyway, we haven't set anything up to handle these dialog lines, because how we want it to work is that there's a sequence, right? So like this message will play first, and then this plays next. So like there's a sort of queue that the dialog manager has to handle. Instead, so we can't just call this function directly. So we'll need a bunch of functions to handle this. Start, update. So when we start, we're going to take in a list, dialog lines, maybe the dialog lines to queue. And over here in our own class, we'll need a queue of dialog lines. We can set its value over in the start dialog function. Just take the list of dialog lines and convert it to a queue. Let's overload this method, because what we want our shop to do is to basically initiate the conversation sequence first, and after it's done, it's going to open the shop. So we're going to need a callback. Action on dialog. It's now by default. Forget to use system. It's just going to do the same thing, but then it's going to assign dialog end to on dialog. So after it converts it to a queue, it's when it can update, or the update function. And this function is when we will cycle through each of the dialog lines. So if we check if there are any more lines in the queue. If there isn't, end the dialog and return. Why we're using queues instead of lists, this handy function called eq. So it just takes the next in line and assigns it to this variable here. And then we can call the talk function line dot speaker inline dot message. And then at its end, close the dialog panel. The handy thing about using this question mark is it basically only invoke if it's not null. We close our dialog panel, set active, then we just have to reset Okay, now we can go over to our shop class. Instead of picking up, move this to a separate function, and then add our little dialog. Let's see if this works. Oh, forgot to set this to inactive. Now we get this, but we don't have any way to close this. So let's make a button for that. Next button. And then over on here, on click, should get Dialog Manager to update the dialog. Okay, let's test it out. So now when we go to the store, get this, and then after that, it opens. To test and see if the dialog lines are being queued properly, let's add one more dialog line to the shop. Now when you interact with the store and the dialog things come out, it's just in your face there, so I think we should give it a little bit of animation. So over in Dialog Manager, create a coroutine, call this type text, take in a string. So it's going to convert the string over here into an array of chars. Why we do this is so that we can have the typing animation through a for loop. So it's gonna one by one add in each character so that it has a typing animation. I'm gonna yield return. So every frame it's going to add in one more character. So over here, we're not going to do this anymore. Comment out this line and replace it with a coroutine. Okay, let's see what happens. Yeah, the problem is we forgot to reset our dialog text before we cycle to the next one. So over here in update dialog, put an empty string. This ensures that the dialog box is empty before the typing coroutine adds any text to it. Yep, it works now. And there is a bug. Now everything's all jumbled up because the coroutine hasn't finished executing, and then we already skipped to the next dialog by pressing this. So to fix this, we'll need a boolean is typing becomes false, and then under update dialog, because this is called when the button is pressed, if it's typing, it's going to be false, and then stop the execution of whatever here. Because over here we want to set its typing to true, and now we'll have to check here. We want to skip the typing sequence and just straight away show the full text. So basically, it's going to set the typing to be true here, and then if the player were to press this button, it's just going to switch the bulb back to false here. And then if it's in the middle of the coroutine, this is executing. It's going to just stop bothering with this, just end the for loop by doing the full text and then breaking the loop. Let's try this. There you see, everything is a lot better now. And with that, we have the basic dialogue system set up. And now let's go back to our characters and our relationship. So let's go back to character data. We also want stuff like birthday, like maybe in future when we want to give gifts, we can have like their likes, dislikes. Now let's add another script, interactable character. So this is the data, and this is the class that will handle interactions with the game object itself. And guess what? We're going to inherit from interactable object. Okay, there's a bit of a flaw with the way we've structured our code, because back then we kind of assumed that all interactable objects would be represented by the item data, but over here we kind of want the character data instead. I mean, we could always refactor this by making this base class an interactable object and then having another class that inherits on here just for the items. But then we've already gone this far, so it would be too much of a hassle to refactor the code, but you can do that in your own time if you want. But for just to keep things simple for this tutorial, we'll not be doing that, and we'll just leave things the way it is right now. So let's just override pickup, and then we'll initialize the conversation with our character data's default dialog. Yeah, guess that'll work for now. Over here, let's add a interactable character. It's Jeff. There's a little box collider. A player to set him to item. Yeah, again, not ideal. We should have named the tag something like interactable or something. But yeah, it's already quite fine to the project. We'll just leave it as it is. Let's have another character here. Just for the player to interact. Ben, that shall be his name. Create a folder over here in prefabs and just put them all here. This is Ben, this is Jeff. And we'll create a character for this man. When you first meet him, he's going to be, "Are you the new farmer?" Okay, now let's give him his character data. And now you can talk to him. Yeah, so it works. But we don't want the same dialogue, the default dialogue, to play every time. We want the dialogue to be more dynamic. So like when the player meets him for the first time, he'll have like his introductory dialogue. And then other than that, you have this default dialogue, things like that. So let's set up our relationships with the characters. So let's create a new class, NPC relationship state. So this will track the state of our relationships with each of the characters. We need a name and some friendship points. And you know, if we want to go with like the heart system, make it so that every 250 friendship points will constitute a heart. And it should be serializable, because we want to save the state in our saves in future. Let's make a constructor. Also a constructor for, because if we meet someone for the first time, it's going to start at 0 friendship points to begin with. So this will be a little shortcut. And then we'll have a little class to keep track of our relationships. Characters, relationship stats. And over here, we're going to have a static list of our relationships. So basically, this list keeps track of the player's relationship with every NPC he has met in the game. So it's going to start empty because the player hasn't met anyone yet. And so we can have a function that checks if the player has met this NPC. So it's going to return relationships.exists. Gonna take the name and see if there's a match in the character's name. If there's a match, it means it's not the first meeting, but if it is the first meeting, this is false, hence the exclamation mark operator. Right, we also need a function to get the relationship information. This will come in handy once we create the relationships page and other stuff. So first I need to check if it's a first meeting. Else it should return the relationships. Use the find function. Same conditions. Oh yeah, we need a function to unlock the character, right? The character. Now we have most of the things that we need to have our dynamic conversations. Mainly just meeting for the first time. Oh, yeah, our relationships. So we have our friend point system, so let's get a function that lets us modify the friend points. Which is basically just get the relationship, the character, and then we access the friendship points, and then we edit. A good habit to prevent errors. Okay, with that, we have our relationships handled. Now we can have some dynamic dialogue. So let's go back to our interactable character class. For this conversation, we'll have the checks determine which dialogue. So first, we have to check if the player is meeting for the first time. Dialogue to have should be the default dialogue by default. Right, so if there is nothing special, it's just going to have the last resort. Is the fallback dialogue, right? So if the player is meeting for the first time, relationship stats dot first meeting, then the dialogue to have will be our character data dot on first meet. Then we'll unlock the character data. Now let's see this in action. Yep. If I talk to him again, it goes back to the default dialogue. Because I've already met him, and so he's already added to my list. So now if I were to talk to Jeff, meeting him for the first time, and so he plays the first meeting dialogue. Now I'm meeting him again, he just says good morning. Now we want to improve the relationship of the character every time the player talks to them, but we also want to limit them to only be able to do that once a day. Else the player just has to keep talking to the NPC repeatedly to just farm hearts, which is not what we want. So over in our relationship state, we'll have a boolean, let's talk today. And then this will be reset at the end of the day, so that the player can go talk to them again, and then they get friendship points. So let's go over to Game State Manager. Log update. Then we'll basically do a for each loop on each of the relationship that the player has. And we'll call this as the timestamp hour 0, so it resets at midnight. They reset. And now over back in relationship stats, let's make a function that checks if it is the first conversation of the day. Or if it is the first meeting, we don't have to check anymore, we can just immediately return true for that. And then get relationship of the character and return PC dot start today. Okay, now back to interactable character. Now just add the checks for whether it's the first conversation of the day and add the friend points accordingly. Let's cache the relationship, because I think we'll be using this a lot more in future. So to start, just do this, and then we can just stop today is true. This should be unlocked at the end of the conversation, really. So let's do that. So on dialogue end, we will have on first meeting function, and then on dialogue end, have our first conversation of the day. Okay, so on dialogue end, we'll add this conversation, and then we'll call dialogue end. A new relationship is created when the player first meets the NPC. So, like in the start function, we should also get the relationship on the first meeting function. Yep, so it logs the first conversation. Oh, okay. We made a mistake here. Forgot to put an exclamation mark operator. Because we only want it to return true if he hasn't talked today. Right. Okay. Yep, so this message is only logged once. Now if I were to talk to this old man, Jeff. Yep, it was the first conversation of the day. And then I talk to him. It's not recorded anymore, which means it's working. If I were to go home and sleep, and reset the day. Now I talk to them again. It logs as first conversation of the day. Likewise, conversation of the day. Yep, so that's it for our relationships system. Now to save it. Save is pretty straightforward, just like what we did in our previous one. First, we need to go to game save state and add our relationships. and then add it to the constructor. This makes it easier to see. This dot relationships equals relationships, and then just have to go over to game save state manager, under game save state, just add relationships stats dot relationships. We also need a function to load up the relationship stats from the save file. And then in load save, yep, so we just have to load stats here. Oh yeah, we need to check if it's null. There's a possibility that the save file passes a null value for the relationships to load. So we need to check for that. And instead of just blindly setting the null value, which would cause errors, we should just initialize a new list. And yeah, I think that's it for our saving. Okay, so now if I were to save this, yep, the relationship data is preserved. That's it for this tutorial. Hope you enjoyed it. If you're feeling generous, please support us on Patreon. You'll have access to our project files as well as the accompanying article for this video. And with that, we'll see you next time.